so I'm going to talk to you about present tense stem changing verbs. If you look over here, I've got a verb out to the side. Right here, I've got querer. Whoops. That wasn't exactly what I meant to do. Okay, so I have the verb querer over here. There's two parts to your verb. There's the stem and there's the ending. And if you remember from when we were conjugating verbs, regular present tense verbs, something you did in level 1, you know that you take the ending off when you want to conjugate a verb, and then you just add there's 3 different types of verbs. There's AR, ER, and IR, and they're how you determine whether one is which type, or how you determine whether a verb is either of those types is by looking at its ending. So this would be an ER verb, and you would take the ER off and you would add the ER endings. Okay, but if it's and basically when we were doing those conjugations before, we didn't do anything to the stem. But if it's a stem changing verb, then it makes sense that there's probably going to be some sort of spelling change in the stem before you add the endings that you guys have already learned. So there's 3 types in the present tense. There are the present indicative tense. There are E to IE stem changers, which means there's an E in the stem that we're just simply going to change to an IE before we add our endings. There's E to I's, which again means we're going to change an E in the stem to an I before we add our endings. And then lastly, there's O to UE's. And same thing again, you're going to take your O and change it to a UE before you add the ending. Okay, so the first type we're going to talk about are E to IE stem changers. Okay, so the first verb that we're going to look at is preferir. Whoops. So this sentence right here says, prefiero comer helado de chocolate que helado de vainilla. So what I'm saying is I prefer to eat chocolate ice cream over vanilla ice cream. So I'm going to do preferir as my first verb, and I'll just put that right here. I can't seem to get it to do it. Why isn't it wanting? Oh, here we go. Okay, so my first verb is going to be preferir. It's an E to IE stem changer. So that means this, well, let's see, let's circle that. This is your ending right here. It's an IR verb. Okay, so everything that's before that is your stem. So this is your stem, prefer, okay? So if I write that in here, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now let me get it all lined up here. Okay, so okay, so then the E that's going to change every time is going to be my second E. So it's going to be this E right here. That's the one that's going to change That's the E that's going to change. And you'll notice how nosotros and vosotros have this little green box around them. That's because nosotros and vosotros are the only ones who don't get this spelling change. So if I want to, I'm actually going to go, let me take this back out. Okay, so prefer is what I'm dealing with. So if I go down here for yo, I've got prefer. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change that second E to an IE, and then I'm going to add the IR ending. Since preferir is an IR verb, here's my IR endings. I'm going to add an O. Prefiero. Okay. So for 2, again, I've got prefer, that's the stem. If you look down here, you'll see that's my stem. I'm going to change that E to an IE, and then I am going to add the appropriate to ending for the IR verbs, which is an ES. Okay. Then for usted, él, and ella, it's going to be prefer still. I'm going to go change that E to an IE, and then I'm going to look at my IR endings, and I would add an E. Okay, nosotros and vosotros, however, they fall in that green box. So I am not going to make the change here. I'm going to leave it as preferir, and then I'm going to add IMOS. And for vosotros, I'm going to do prefer. I'm not going to make the change again and add the IS, preferis. Okay. And then here's prefer, again, my stem. I'm going to change my stem to an I, that E to an IE. Then for ustedes, I add an EN. And that's the same for ellos, ellas, ustedes. I can do it again. Prefer, prefieren. So it's prefiero, prefieres, prefiere, preferimos, preferís, prefieren, prefieren. Okay. The next verb that I'm going to look at is entender, which is right here. Entiende español la profesora? Sí, entiendo español. ¿Entiende usted español? Sí, entiendo español. So entender is to is to understand or to comprehend. So the verb is, I'll stick it right here, entender. Okay, and so the ending this time is ER, but the stem, and this is the stem. Okay, now these guys get lumped together because they have a similar change in their stems, but you're still going to conjugate them based upon the rules that you learned for regular AR, ER, and IR verbs. So preferir and entender get lumped together because they both have an E to IE stem change when you're conjugating them in the present tense. But because preferir ends in IR, you use the IR endings, and because entender ends in ER, you're going to look at ER endings. So you want to make sure when you're doing this that you pay attention to how each verb ends so that you can use the appropriate endings. So the stem for entender is intend. Okay, so I'm going to change that second E to an IE, entiend, and then my ER endings, it would make this an O. So for 2, it would be intend, that's my stem again. I have to make the change here, entiend, and for ER endings, that would be an ES. For usted, el and ella, intend is my stem. I'm going to change that E to an IE because it falls outside of that green box, so I have to make the change. And for usted, I just add an E. For el and ella, if I want to do it again, intend, I go back, I change my E to an IE, and then for el, ella, I add an E. For nosotros, it's in the green box. So here's my stem. I'm not going to make the spelling change. I'm just going to add the ending, and this time it's an EMOS. Okay, for vosotros, it's in the green box. Here's my stem. I'm not going to go back and make any changes, and I'm going to add the EIS. Whoops. Okay. For ustedes, here's my stem. It does fall outside the green box, so I'm going to change my E to an IE. And then I'm going to add the EN because that's what I would do for ER endings. And I'm going to do the same right here. EN. Tend, I go back, I make it an IEND, and then I'm going to add an EN. Okay. The next verb that I'm going to look at is empezar. Okay. Nuestra clase empieza a las 9 de la mañana. So our class starts at 9 in the morning, and empieza comes from empezar, which is an AR verb. Oops. Okay, so here's my ending, and here's my stem. And I'm going to make the spelling change again, only this time I'm going to be looking at AR endings because this verb ends in AR. So it would be empieza is my stem. I go back, I change that E to an IE, and then I add an O because that's the endings that go with the AR verbs. For two, it's empieza is my stem. I'm going to go back and make it an IEZ, and then for two, I would add an AS. So for usted, empieza is the stem. I'm going to go back and make the change, and then I'm going to add an A because that's what you would add for usted for an AR verb. And the same here, empieza, I'm going to go back and make this change, and I'm going to add an A. Nosotros and vosotros, the box isn't there, but it should be, so I'm going to add it. Since they're within that green box, we are not going to make the stem change here. So empieza is going to stay that way, and I'm going to add an AMOS. So it would be like, nosotros empezamos a estudiar cuando regresamos a casa. Yo empiezo a estudiar a las 10 de la noche. So for vosotros, I'm not going to make the change either. Empieza is my stem, I leave it alone, and I'm going to add the AIS. And for ustedes, oops. Here's my stem. I am going to make the change because this is outside of the green box. And I'm going to add an AN because that's the endings that go with ustedes. And I'm going to do the same thing down here. Empieza is my stem. I'm going to make the change because I'm outside of the box. And I'm going to add an AN for ellos, ellas, ustedes. Okay, so if we go back over here, here are some other verbs that are also E to IE stem changers. You've got empezar, to begin, entender, to understand, pensar, to think about, or to plan to do something, perder, to lose, and preferir, to prefer. Okay, I've gone ahead and put a red box around all the E's that change. These E's have to change to an IE before you add the either AR, ER, or IR endings to them when you conjugate them for everywhere but nosotros and vosotros, because you can see the example up here. Yo quiero, tú quieres, usted quiere, él, ella quiere, nosotros queremos, vosotros queréis, ustedes quieren, ellos, ellas quieren. There are two other verbs that go along with this, tener and venir. Tener, to have, and venir, to come. They work like E to IE stem changers except for their yo forms, because their yo forms they don't follow the stem changing rule. So they are like E to IE stem changers except for their yo forms, which have an additional irregularity.